Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and today I want to talk a little bit about intermittent fasting. I want to talk about what it is, what to kind of consider around it when you might think about it, and what are the things that you want to be careful of if you are going to do it. So, intermittent fasting is this idea that we don't eat for an extended period throughout the day. And in reality, a much better term for it is time restricted eating. So, time restricted eating means exactly that. You have a period of time in the day where you're not, or sorry, where you're focusing your eating. And that might be a 4 hour window, a 6 hour window, an 8 hour window. It doesn't really matter. But why that time restricted eating, why I say that's a better phrase for it is because if your cutoff is at 6 in the evening, it's not that at 6:01 you're in a fasting state. It takes 2 or 3 hours for you to get into that fasting state. And so thinking of it as like a window of eating is sort of a better way to think of it. So that's the typical pattern of intermittent fasting is you eat for a period of time in the day and the rest of the time you're not eating. The other way, I guess, to do intermittent fasting is a 5 and 2 pattern. So you eat normally for 5 days of the week, and then 2 days of the week, you have a significant caloric restriction or reduction to like 500 calories in a day. Okay. One of the challenges with intermittent fasting is that there is no real definition for it. So when people say I'm doing an intermittent fasting, they might mean that they're eating in a 4 hour window. They might mean that they're eating in a 12-hour window. The definition is very fluid. And a lot of the studies are looking at different times and different durations. And so it's really hard to kind of figure out what works for you and what's optimal for, in general. But the one thing I do want to say is that it doesn't matter what you read on social media or someone has told you works really well for them. There is no one right way to eat that works for everybody. I've seen this happen so many times where someone will try something like intermittent fasting and they eat in an 8 hour window and they feel amazing and they're sleeping well and their energy's up and they're exercising and it's just awesome. But then they tell their partner and their friends and their niece and nephew and all of the people that they know, and they post it on social media. And so suddenly everyone's like, I need to try this. Look, this person feels amazing. I want to feel amazing. I'm going to try it too. And they try an 8 hour eating window and they feel tired and cranky and lethargic and not great. And then they think, well, I'm doing it wrong. Obviously, it works so well for this person. Why isn't it working for me? And that's just not the case. Not everything works for everybody. The same goes for all of the I had so many people come in and like I'm supposed to be paleo and I'm supposed to be keto and I'm supposed to be vegan and I'm supposed to be gluten free and I'm supposed to be intermittent fasting and I'm supposed to be on the cabbage soup diet and I'm supposed to be and I'm supposed to and I'm supposed to. And the recommendations out there for food are just so wide reaching that you really have to know what works for you. And what works for you is amazing and that's awesome. And once you figure that out, run with it. But you can't promise that's going to work for everybody else. Okay. So what does intermittent fasting do? In When we eat food, carbohydrates in particular, we get a very simple carb called glucose. And glucose is used as a fuel for the body. The heart, the lungs, the liver, the muscles, all of the things use glucose. When we aren't eating, our body pulls, there's glucose stores in our body that we use, but when we run out of stores of glucose, we use fat. So fat can be converted into energy. Away we go, we can carry on with our day. So the premise of intermittent fasting is that it gives your body time and availability to tap into those fat stores to use them up. Intermittent fasting has been shown to be really helpful for blood sugar regulation, pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, not necessarily type 1. That's another conversation for another day, maybe, but very helpful for like the pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes thing. Very helpful for weight loss. I think that's less to do, maybe in some people this is true, it's the fat, using the fat, but it's usually less to do with the fat metabolism as it is to do with just a caloric restriction. So if you're only eating for 8 hours in a day, you're probably skipping out on a meal or a snack or something, and you're just not having as many calories as you normally would. So caloric restriction often means weight loss. Um, People use it as a way to burn fat. There's all sorts of potential benefits to intermittent fasting, but I want to highlight a couple of the things, actually four things that you might want to consider if intermittent fasting is something that you haven't tried and you're interested in trying. And I've got four concerns, I'll say, that might be not the right word, but I've got four things to be aware of when you're thinking about intermittent fasting. So number one, If you have a very narrow eating window, like 2, 4, 6 hours, it's possible that you could get into a long-term significant caloric deficit to the extent that you might experience malnutrition. That's a little bit extreme, but you might not be getting enough macronutrients or vitamins or minerals or any of the things that you need to get. So just be aware that you are still meeting your caloric needs even within that window. So make sure that even if I know people who've, gotten down to a really small window, like 4 to 6 hours, and they feel like they're doing nothing but eating in that window because they still need to get the right calories in. Make sure that's a big focus for you if you are going to do intermittent fasting, that you're not too far in the caloric restriction. Concern number 2 is around hormones. Cortisol, everyone's favorite hormone to talk about. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It's produced in events of stress. But when we are hungry, when our blood sugar drops to a certain point, cortisol is also released. Cortisol's job in that case is to pull the blood sugar out of stores, use it, you've got your energy, away you go. But when you add high levels of cortisol to an already existing stressed out high cortisol system, you're going to run into problems. Extremely high levels of cortisol for extended periods of time can have implications like um, interfering with thyroid function. So if you have a thyroid condition or you know someone who has a thyroid condition, things that you want to be on the lookout for thyroid function is, low energy. In the low functioning or hypothyroid picture, you maybe have constipation, dry skin, dry hair, fatigue, sleep disruption. So really high levels of cortisol can very much impact thyroid function. The other thing that can do is impact sex hormones. So in particular, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. When the body needs to make extra cortisol to deal with the stressful situation or the fasting, if you will, it can steal the precursors to prevent estrogen and progesterone and testosterone being made. And so if you're experiencing like menstrual irregularities, or you're, having fertility issues, or you're experiencing symptoms of perimenopause or menopause, adding that extra cortisol is very likely, not probably, it's very likely going to be detrimental to you. So you really want to assess where your cortisol levels are at and where your stress levels just as a baseline are at. Chronic stress is the thing that if you are under, you really probably don't want to do a strict intermittent fasting routine. So chronic stress could be something like a really stressful job, caring for kids, caring for aging parents. Sleep deprivation actually puts you in a relatively chronic stress position, because during sleep our body's meant to kind of rest and reset. But when we aren't sleeping well, when we don't get to that rest and reset and regenerate page, that adds extra stress to the body. So anybody who's severely sleep deprived, I don't at all recommend a strict intermittent fasting routine. Okay. Concern number 3 is intermittent fasting may be connected with disordered eating. If you have a history of disordered eating, and that might mean something like anorexia nervosa or bulimia. So those are two well-defined eating disorders. Um, Intermittent fasting is not for you. And I would actually argue that any pattern of eating that's really going to restrict anything, whether it's restriction around time, restriction around types of food, restrictions around how you eat, if you have a history of any sort of eating disorder or disordered eating, you want to avoid any of those. The other kind of disordered eating pattern I just want to draw a bit of attention to is this one called orthorexia. The idea of orthorexia is that you won't put anything into your body, you won't eat anything that isn't considered healthy. And I use that as an air quotes because the reality is that there is no good and bad food. There just is food. Some food has more nutritional value than others. Sometimes you need to eat and focus on different foods in different stages of your life or stages of your day. But there is no good and bad food. And when we subject ourselves to this idea of good versus bad, it's a pretty fine line between eating healthy and disordered healthy eating. Okay, so just be aware of that if this is sort of a pattern that you've fallen into in the past, definitely avoid the intermittent fasting. And the fourth and final concern I have around intermittent fasting is actually hunger cues and not being aware of them. If you have a kid or know a kid, or you've ever watched a toddler come in and, say, tell their parents that they're hungry or indicate that they're hungry. Let's say you have a really chatty 3-year-old who wants a banana, and you give them a banana and they have 3 bites and then they leave and they walk off. it might be really irritating because now it seems like they've just wasted the banana, although there's lots that you can do with a leftover banana. But what they're doing is they're listening to their hunger cues. They were hungry. They came in, they had a couple bites of banana, and they went. Kids are really, really good at listening to their hunger cues. Adults, not so much. As we get older and all of the things that come into play, this is a whole section on like mindful eating that I'll have to do another time. But as we get older and all of these things come into play, we tend to not listen to our hunger cues. And if you're going strictly by the clock in intermittent fasting, so let's say that you're not supposed to start eating till 10 a.m., but at 8 a.m. you're starving and you're irritable and your stomach's growling, you're not listening to your hunger cues. And I would argue that that is not going to serve you. Listening to your hunger cues and eating based on your actual hunger, on like physical hunger, not the emotional hunger, eating based on those cues is going to be so much more beneficial for you in the long run than any intermittent fasting or diet or anything. The one thing that I will say though, is in with regards to fasting, is it is important to stop eating in the evening and not eat until the morning. This has nothing to do with weight loss. It does, but it's more about your circadian rhythm. So matching your food intake with your circadian rhythm is really important. Our bodies are not meant to be digesting food in the evening. And so if you don't eat, stop eating after dinner and not eat again till breakfast, that is going to help with blood sugar regulation. It's going to help with weight control and maintenance. It's going to help with all sorts of things. So whether or not you consider a 12, 13 hours overnight without eating intermittent fasting, that's a big question. I have no idea. I've researched this. I've looked at this. I don't know if that is considered intermittent fasting. If it is, then I recommend it for everybody. There might be some exceptions. Again, this is something you're going to have to try. If you're not eating overnight and you feel crappy and gross and blah, 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 maybe give me a call or send me a message. There's lots of things that may be playing into that feeling. But avoiding eating overnight is actually a really important part of our metabolism. Okay. So be aware of the challenges and the potential risks associated with intermittent fasting. But if you want to and you're not under chronic stress, give it a try, see how you feel. You might find that you can no problem do a 10-hour eating window and you feel amazing. You might find that you need a 14-hour eating window. You'll find out what works for you. And remember, you're the only one that knows what works for you, not the guy on Instagram yelling about the paleo diet. All right. Hope you have a great day. Let me know if you have any comments. And again, if sleep is a concern for you, because I talk about this and blood sugar regulation around sleep all the time with people, let me know. Happy to help and share some resources. Okay, have a good day.